Before McDonald's opened its first drive-thru, before frozen waffles existed, before anyone had ever heard of a breakfast sandwich wrapped in paper, Americans made breakfast with their hands every single morning. Real breakfast. From scratch. 4 pennies. Then fast food came in and told everyone that cooking was too slow, too hard, and too old-fashioned. And within one generation, we forgot everything our grandmothers knew. Here are 7 of those breakfasts. Number 1. Bread and bacon grease. There was a coffee can sitting beside the stove in nearly every working-class American kitchen from the 1930s through the late 1950s, and if you grew up in that era you know exactly what was inside it. Bacon grease. Rendered fat saved from every single pan of bacon that had ever been cooked in that kitchen, poured carefully into the can while it was still warm and liquid, stored at room temperature because nobody refrigerated it and nobody got sick from it because the salt in the rendering process made it shelf-stable for weeks. That can was one of the most valuable things in the kitchen and everybody knew it. You did not throw away bacon grease. You did not pour it down the drain. You saved it the way you saved everything that had value because nothing that had value got wasted. Every morning a mother would take a thick slice of white bread, day-old if possible because day-old bread was cheaper and the extra day of drying out actually made it absorb the grease better. And spread it with a generous spoonful of that warm dripping, covering every corner of the bread right to the crust, then shake salt over the top and hand it to whoever was standing at the counter waiting. That was breakfast. For millions of American families across the rural South and Midwest and Appalachia and the industrial Northeast, that was the morning meal that got people out the door and into the world. Children ate it standing up, one hand holding the bread and the other holding their school bag. Fathers folded a second piece in wax paper and put it in the lunch pail without being asked because everyone understood that the bread and grease was good enough to eat twice. The flavor was unlike anything that has come out of a modern kitchen. Smoky from the bacon fat, deeply savory from the salt, with a richness that soaked into the bread and coated your mouth in a way that kept hunger at bay for hours. It was not a delicate flavor. It was not subtle. It was honest and direct and filling, and it cost essentially nothing because the grease was a byproduct of cooking that would otherwise have gone to waste. In the late 1960s and through the 1970s, nutritional science, or what passed for nutritional science at the time, began its war on animal fats, and saturated fat became the villain of the American diet almost overnight. Doctors told patients to stop cooking with lard and bacon grease and switch to vegetable oil and margarine. The coffee can disappeared from the stovetop within a single decade. Families threw them away or tucked them in the back of a cabinet and forgot about them. And breakfast changed forever. Not because the science was right, which it largely wasn't, but because the message was delivered with enough authority that nobody questioned it. Recent research has substantially revised the understanding of saturated fat and its relationship to heart disease. Bacon grease has been quietly rehabilitated in nutritional terms. But the tradition is gone. The can beside the stove is gone. The morning ritual of spreading warm dripping on bread and shaking salt over it is gone. Fast food replaced it with a sausage biscuit made in a factory and heated under a lamp and wrapped in paper and sold for $3, and nobody stopped to ask whether the trade was worth it. It was not worth it. It has never been worth it. Number 2. Cornmeal mush. A 5-pound sack of cornmeal cost about 20 cents in 1952, and in the hands of a woman who knew what she was doing, and in the 1950s most women who ran a household knew exactly what they were doing with a sack of cornmeal. That 20 cents made 2 weeks of breakfasts for a family of 5. 2 weeks. That is what real cooking looks like when you know what you are working with and you refuse to waste anything. The mush itself was simple in the way that only truly good things are simple. Cornmeal stirred slowly into boiling salted water, kept moving with a wooden spoon so it didn't stick or clump, cooked over low heat for 30 to 40 minutes until it was thick enough that the spoon could stand upright in the center of the pot without falling over. That thickness was the sign that it was ready. Too thin and it didn't have the body to sustain a man through a morning of hard work. Too thick and it was paste. Right was creamy and smooth and dense and warm all the way through, steaming gently in the bowl, smelling of toasted corn and salt in a way that was completely specific to that dish and nothing else. Families across Appalachia and the rural South and the farming communities of the Midwest ate it every morning. Served hot with a thin drizzle of sorghum molasses that pooled in the center and seeped down into the mush as you stirred it, or with a splash of cold buttermilk poured around the edges that cooled the mush slightly and added a tang that cut through the richness of the corn. Sharecroppers ate it before heading into fields that belonged to someone else. Coal miners ate it before descending into darkness for 8 or 10 hours. Mill workers ate it before standing at machines for shifts that started before the sun was fully up. It held them. That is the word that kept coming up when older people talked about this food. It held you. It stayed with you in a way that modern breakfast food simply does not. Then there was what happened the next morning, which might have been even better than the original bowl. The leftover mush, and there was always leftover mush, got poured into a greased loaf pan and left overnight to chill and firm up into something that could be sliced. In the morning, those slices went into a cast iron skillet with a spoonful of lard and fried over medium heat without being moved until the bottom developed a crust that was golden and crackling and slightly caramelized from the cornmeal's natural sugars meeting the hot fat. Then flipped, once, carefully, and finished on the other side. The result was crispy on the outside and still soft and creamy in the center, and it was so much better than the original bowl of mush that children who had only tolerated the hot version begged for the fried version. A fried egg on top if there was one to spare. A drizzle of sorghum if the jar wasn't empty. That was Saturday morning in a farmhouse kitchen, and it cost a few pennies, and it was better than anything that has ever come out of a fast food breakfast menu at any price. Number 3. Red-eye gravy and biscuits. To understand red-eye gravy, you first have to understand country ham, and to understand country ham you have to understand that it is nothing like the pink wet ham sold in plastic packages at modern grocery stores. Country ham is dry-cured in salt for weeks or months, intensely salty and firm and deeply flavored in a way that has no modern commercial equivalent, and in the rural South of the 1950s it was one of the foundations of the kitchen. Hung in the smokehouse, sliced as needed, every slice worth more in flavor than its small size suggested because the concentration of salt and smoke and thyme made it almost impossibly potent. You slice it thin and fry it hard in a cast iron skillet until the edges are deeply browned and the fat has rendered into the pan and the kitchen smells like something that has been perfected over 100 years of daily practice. Then you pull the ham out and set it aside, and you pour a splash. Just a splash of hot black coffee straight from the pot into that screaming hot pan, and you stir it around fast, scraping up every bit of brown dripping stuck to the iron, and what happens is red-eye gravy. Thin and dark and salty and slightly bitter from the coffee and deeply savory from the ham drippings, it is unlike any other gravy that has ever existed in any cuisine, and it cannot be replicated with different equipment or different ingredients or a different pan. It has to be a cast iron skillet that has been used daily for years. It has to be country ham, real country ham, not the wet-cured imitation. It has to be black coffee, no cream, no sugar. And it has to be made fast and eaten immediately, ladled generously over split buttermilk biscuits that were made from scratch that same morning. Flour and lard and cold buttermilk mixed by hand with a light touch and baked in a hot oven until they rose tall and golden and split along the middle in that line that told you the layers were right. The gravy soaked into the cut face of the biscuit and the biscuit held it, and together they were something that justified getting up before dawn. This breakfast fed the rural South for generations. It built the tobacco farms and the cotton fields and the mill towns and the small cities that grew up around them. And then fast food came in with its breakfast sandwiches made from wet-cured ham on a processed bun heated under a lamp, and people stopped making red-eye gravy because it took a real pan and real ham and real skill, and fast food required none of those things. The skill died with the generation that had it. The breakfast died with the skill. And nothing that replaced it has ever been half as good. Number 4. Tomato gravy on biscuits. There are dishes that survive because they are famous, and there are dishes that survive because they are written down, and there are dishes that vanish because they were too regional and too humble and too embedded in the daily life of people who never thought of themselves as doing anything worth preserving. Tomato gravy is one of those vanished dishes, and its disappearance is one of the quieter tragedies of American food history because it was genuinely extraordinary, a breakfast that cost almost nothing, fed large families completely, and tasted far more sophisticated than its ingredients had any right to produce. You start with bacon drippings in a heavy pan, always bacon drippings, never oil, because the smoky pork fat is half the flavor of the finished gravy. You add flour and stir it into the fat over medium heat, cooking it until it smells nutty and slightly toasty and has lost all its raw flour taste, which takes maybe 2 minutes of constant stirring and your full attention. Then the tomatoes go in. A full can of stewed tomatoes in winter when the garden was gone, fresh tomatoes in summer when they were coming in faster than any family could eat them, crushed against the side of the pan with a wooden spoon so they broke down into the roux and everything combined into a thick, bubbling, rust-colored gravy that smelled of pork fat and acidic tomato and toasted flour all at once. Salt, black pepper, a pinch of sugar to cut the sharpness of the tomatoes. Let it simmer for 10 minutes until it thickened completely and the flavors had melted together into something unified and complex. Then ladle it over split biscuits so generously that the gravy pooled on the plate around the bread and you could sop up every drop before you left the table. The acidity of the tomato against the richness of the pork fat created a balance that was genuinely sophisticated, bright and savory and slightly sweet and completely filling. Families in the Ozarks and across the Upper South ate this every morning for decades. It was so routine, so completely embedded in daily life, that nobody wrote the recipe down because everyone already knew it. It lived in the hands of the women who made it, and when those women moved to cities and their children grew up eating processed food, the knowledge moved with them and then died with them quietly without ceremony. Today tomato gravy survives in almost no restaurant, no cookbook, no cooking show. It exists only in the memories of people old enough to have eaten it at a grandmother's table. And those people will tell you, every single one of them, that it was better than anything that replaced it. Number 5. Oatmeal with lard and salt. Everything you think you know about oatmeal is wrong. Or rather, everything you think you know about oatmeal was invented by food companies in the last 50 years to sell you sweeteners and toppings and flavored instant packets that have nothing to do with how Americans actually ate oatmeal for most of this country's history. Real oatmeal, the oatmeal that working families ate in the 1950s before the food industry got its hands on it, was savory. It was cooked in water with salt, stirred until thick and creamy and fully cooked through, and finished with a spoonful of lard stirred in at the end so the fat melted through the oats and made them rich and coating and genuinely filling in a way that sweetened oatmeal with its sugar spike and subsequent crash never achieves. A canister of rolled oats cost about 19 cents in 1955 and it made a week of breakfasts for a family without anyone going hungry before noon. The lard was already in the kitchen because lard was always in the kitchen. It was the primary cooking fat of the American working class for 100 years and it sat in a tin beside the stove the way olive oil sits on the counter in modern kitchens. Children did not love the savory version. Children have never loved anything that doesn't taste like sugar. But they ate it because the alternative was going to school hungry and their mothers stood at the stove watching until every bowl was empty. And then those children grew up and their bodies remembered what it felt like to be genuinely full in the morning, that slow sustained fullness that comes from fat and complex starch releasing gradually rather than spiking and crashing. And some of them went looking for it in the wrong places for the rest of their lives without ever finding it because what they were looking for had been replaced by a flavored packet that dissolves in hot water in 90 seconds and leaves you hungry again before 10 o'clock. Modern nutritionists now specifically recommend adding healthy fat to oatmeal for sustained energy and blood sugar stability. The research supports exactly what poor American families were doing with a tin of lard 70 years ago out of pure economic necessity. They were right. The food companies that replaced their breakfast with sweetened instant oats were wrong. And the families that made the switch lost something they never got back.